So, as a parent going through a divorce, when you have kids, what happens with your kids is probably the biggest thing that you need to be worried about. Setting up your kids for their future is something that every parent thinks about, every parent worries about. And if you're going through a divorce, you probably have a heightened sense of anxiety and worry. So, it's really important that you don't mess this up. You see, if you try and rush through something or you force a decision through that you're not comfortable with, it can take years and years to try and undo that. And sometimes you can't ever undo it. So it's important that before you finalize anything, before you really even get started, that you have a plan. Do you understand what the possible outcomes could be? If you don't understand what the outcomes can be, then you shouldn't really even get started. So it's important to make sure that you understand the components of a parenting plan, what you can do to change the outcomes of that before you even get started. Because if you don't, quite frankly, it's going to be very, very difficult to undo. So you find yourself in the middle of a custody battle and your ex has now accused you of something. What do you do? Well, what you do next could have a huge impact on what happens with your children going forward. You see, making an accusation doesn't mean it's true. And I know that. I hope you know that. But the reality is most people allow their emotions to dictate their response. They lash out. They make an accusation back, or they try and defend themselves in a way that leads to more problems or issues. What you do next is important. So you need to talk to your lawyer. Don't try and do this alone, because if you do and it leads to further consequences, sometimes you can't unring the bell. If you go to your lawyer, explain what happened, what you did or didn't do, they can help you to craft a plan of what you should do next. I was asked recently about the length of a custody case and how it impacts the children. The reality is the length of the case shouldn't necessarily impact the children. The only reason it would impact them is if the parents get them involved. Kids should really not understand what's going on. They shouldn't know, is mom causing the delays? Is dad causing the delays? Who's doing what? Because the kids should be living their life. The only thing that the kids should know is maybe there's a new parenting schedule. Maybe one of the parents moves out. Dad moves into a new place. Okay, now I see dad on this time and this time. But they shouldn't necessarily know that you're still involved in court. If they do, you're probably doing something wrong. Adults should have adult conversations. Kids should have kid conversations. Now, this becomes really tricky when you start having teenagers or different things like that, because sometimes teenagers are very mature. They seem to understand what you're going through. They can have adult conversations, but then at the same time, they can revert back to kid. You have to remember they are still children. They don't need to be involved in this. Even if they're 17, 18 years old, the reality is the other side is still their parent. So what you say is going to have a long-term impact. It just doesn't need to be done. Kids shouldn't know. And if they do, they should be in therapy to get the help that they need. If you're thinking about winning a custody battle, first of all, you have to understand that there is no such thing as winning a custody battle. Because if you're going into it with a mindset of a win or a trophy, you've got the wrong approach. Even if you don't like your ex, they are still the parent. They still should have some sort of impact on their child's life, unless the court ultimately says no, they shouldn't. And there are some circumstances where a parent needs to be removed from a child's life for a period of time until they get things worked out themselves. But the reality is there's no winning. You have to understand, break this down into the components and identify what do you think is best for your kids under each one of those levels. And if you walk out with each one of those things addressed, I guess you could say it's a win. But the first thing you have to do is you have to identify all the different components. What do you want it to look like? And then create a plan of action to go about getting there. Can you agree on any of those decision-making topics? Can you agree on the parenting schedule? If you can't, you ultimately have to work with your attorney to convince the judge of why you're right. There are several factors, and those are called the best interest of the child factors or the best interest of the children factors, and they get applied in a case like this. We'll look at where do the kids live, what are their activities, what are their ties, so many different things that go into this decision and ultimately will impact your children. If you have questions about a custody battle, it's so important that you have a legal team in your corner that understands child custody in Illinois. My office would be honored to help you through this process. If you're in this position, please give us a call.